Can you hear me, Shirley?
Now, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, I can. I'm not sure which one do I turn off. Do I turn off my computer one or do I turn off or both of them when I'm not talking? Do I turn off the one on my computer?
You should. Yeah, you should just mute Zoom, leave your computer one on.
Okay,
Okay, thanks, Deb.
thank you.
evening, everyone. I'd like to call the Rapid City Area School Board of Education study session to order. Shirley, will we have can you have a roll call, please? And just to say that all roll calls or anything we vote on tonight.
Yes. Troy Carr,
Here.
Jamie Clapham. Here. Christine Stephenson is on her way. Deb Baker,
Here,
Kate Thomas.
Here.
Michael Berkland is absent with notice, and Walt Swan.
Okay, thank you, Shirley. At this time, I'll ask everyone, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Shirley, did you call Kate?
Mhm.
Okay, all right, we just want
Yep.
to verify that. All right. We have an approval. I'll take a motion for the, well, before I do this. No, I'll entertain a motion and a second for the approval of the proposed agenda.
I'll make a motion.
Okay. Okay. In our discussion, just bear with us. We're having all type of technical difficulties tonight.
Okay, now we should be good.
Okay, we're good. I need to make a motion to add, we're gonna have a discussion on the bond, which is a continuation from our retreat. And so I'd like to add that as item 6B, and other would be item 6C. So that's the motion. I need a second.
Second.
Any discussion on adding an item for us to discuss the bond? Okay, all in favor, roll call, please.
We're voting on the motion first.
Yes. Oh, the chair recognizes Kate.
Hi, good evening. I would just question that with somebody, two of us obviously on Zoom, Michael being gone, if maybe we don't have that discussion yet, because I would actually like to be there for that one. And I think we need to be present for it, but that's just my opinion. That's it.
Any other discussion? And for clarity, Kate, this is only a continuation of the discussion that we started about the bond. And I wanted to, we didn't have time at the retreat to finish that discussion. And I wanted to finish that discussion sooner than later, especially because of tonight's study session topics about enrollment, about boundaries, about facilities, which directly affects and our discussion about the bond. So this is not, how do I say, a bond discussion because there's no bond to discuss, but just continuing our feelings and emotions and where we are, each board member, about that issue, which doesn't necessitate being here in person. Okay, any other discussions? Oh, the chair recognizes Mrs. Clapham.
And just to say, I can understand in a involved conversation, I definitely understand where Ms. Thomas is coming from. However, we do have people who are present, who have history to present regarding the bond. So I don't know if we wanna, because that was the plan, I think that it was supposed to be on here. So I want to be respectful of those people's time too. So just to put out there.
Okay, any other discussion? So what we are voting on now is to add to the agenda an agenda item for us to just discuss and talk about our feelings about the bond. So Shirley, roll call vote, please. Yes.
Jamie Clapham.
Yes.
Deb Baker,
Yes.
did you say yes, Deb?
Yes.
Thank you. Kate Thomas
No.
and Walt Swan.
Yes. Okay, so now that that's added to the agenda, now I will entertain any more discussions about the motion and second to approve the proposed agenda. Any other discussion? Okay, Shirley, roll call. Yes.
Jamie,
Yes.
sorry. Deb,
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
and Walt. Motion carries 5-0.
Okay. This time, persons wishing to address the school board may present themselves. I won't take the time to read the guidelines, just each speaker, please be aware of the guidelines and that they will be enforced. First up is Mrs. Flynn.
Thank you, President Carr. My name is Kara Flynn. I'm speaking this evening as a private citizen and as the tri-chair of the volunteer committee on the bond. And I was also the in charge of signage for the Vote Yes campaign. I'm just here this evening to tell you that I'm really thrilled that we're coming back to a bond discussion. Those needs still exist. And in fact, with the boiler going out at Canyon Lake, and I know that the crack is increasing at Robbinsdale. I would say that we really have a very strong need to move this forward so that we put the district in a place where we can serve all children and make sure that everyone has equal access to facilities that are educationally appropriate. I am happy to see South going up and with the ESSER funds. But also know that had we passed the last bond, we could have used that money to bring every kid in the district back up to where they should have been after COVID. So I would like the community to think about what we can do by investing in our facilities and in our bond and in our children, which really that is investing in our future and in making sure that every child has equal access to appropriate facilities. Now, I've talked to a lot of people that were on the Vote Yes campaign, and there's a lot of knowledge from the last campaign, and people are willing to share and talk. And we would like to also encourage people, you all, to have as many listening sessions as you need so that people feel included and everyone feels included as we move forward, because we were going to bring this back in June after the last bond, but then COVID hit and all things change, as we know. So I'm just here as a representing the Vote Yes campaign committee, just to say we are here and willing to help, and encouraging you to reach out to all members of the community and whatever means necessary to make sure that everyone's heard and that their needs are met. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next speaker is Mrs. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. President, board members. Val Simpson, lifelong Rapid City resident, co-chair of the last bond campaign back in 2020. I actually was just invited on Sunday by Christine Stevenson to come. I've been a little out of the loop here in terms of your discussions with the bond and echo much of what Kara also shared, but wanted to just leave a couple pearls for you to consider in these conversations. And I admit that my memory has faded just a little bit as our world changed quite drastically after just within weeks of the last bond election. So I admit that I have a huge box of records somewhere in my attic. I know it's there because I saw it, but I didn't have a chance to dig in there. And my electronic records at my office weren't quite as complete as I'd hoped. But I did come across today a list of 13 listening sessions, tours, and mini conversations that were completed last time to make sure we were listening and really collaborating with other members of the community. And I thought that would be a good thing to just refresh our memory on. Other question I had just initially off the top of my head for this group to consider if you're going to take another run at another bond is, what did we learn from the last campaign? And I admit, I can't even tell you what I think those key points are, other than I think we do need to consider and definitely listen and collaborate before decisions are made to make sure we are hearing other members of the community. And I think generally my memory might be selective, but I recall that there was a lot of support, but maybe the approach and the details were sometimes not always agreed upon. So I do think collaboration, and Kara mentioned as well, is really super important in this process. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you for all that you do, and glad also plan to be part of the conversation going forward in whatever way I can. And last time though, do remember, and maybe just a refresher on how I got involved. I was on I think it was called the Citizens Advisory Committee, and that morphed, or some of us volunteered to be part of a facilities task force. And that was a dozen or so people from the community and district as well that really studied this prior to bringing the bond to conclusion. So just as a little refresher for some of you, that is at least how I got involved. And so now I'm here tonight to listen, kind of learn where you're at right now, and hopefully be part of the effort going forward. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Ms. Thompson.
Hi, board. We meet again. Sorry I missed you last week. I was at a South Dakota Stock Growers Convention. My name is Florence Thompson. I'm president of South Dakota Parents Involved in Education, SDPI, and I'm also a retired school psychologist with over 40 years experience in the schools. I'm going to be talking about the enrollment and the facilities planning, and also a little bit about the bond. There is a general mistrust of the public education system by many people, particularly a mistrust in the larger schools. Parents feel like they have no control over what's happening with their kids. In a recent article in the Dakota Scout, I'm just quoting from that, 165% enrollment is down since 2011. So that's 165% down since 2011 across the state. Homeschool went up. They didn't state this in the numbers, but it's in actual numbers, from 3,400 students in 2011 to 9,120 students currently. There are now approximately 2,900 homeschool students in Rapid City. And I don't believe that includes church schools, kids that are being schooled in other ways. There are now more church schools available and more coming online all the time. Just an aside, I was talking to somebody who has knowledge of the New Underwood School District, and they have a waiting list. They have kids begging to get into their district. So that's something you should consider. Parents feel like in a smaller district, they have more control over what happens with their kids. With students exiting the public system, it makes justifying an increase in taxes with a bond for new facilities a hard sell. As more people choose other options for educating their kids, it's not just those parents. They all have grandparents, relatives, friends, neighbors, and the word gets around. I was part of the vote no on the previous bond, so I can speak about that. And the reasons that we opposed that bond were numerous, but number one was it was way too large. It was very long term. It was strung out over a long period of time, and it was going to come in three, I think they called them tranches. I don't know. Anyway, three separate bonds were going to be linked together over time. So the taxes would go up and then up and then up again. This was why it didn't succeed. People just did not, it was too ambitious. There was no way to justify having that much money taken out, and people can't afford that. Now, you may think that people have a lot of money out there, but they don't. And the taxpayers are really strapped. And I know you talk about inflation and its effect on the schools. Well, it also has a big effect on just the ordinary person, the taxpayer. So we don't have a lot of money to throw around. Anything that you're going to put into a bond, you better have a really good justification for it. It needs to be conservative, a conservative estimate of what you need, and not just go for broke and see how happy you can make Elevate.
Thank you. All right. This time we're going to have board response to open forum comments. Any hands? Chair recognizes Mrs. Stephenson.
Hi, thank you. And I apologize to everybody for being late tonight. And I wish I could have heard all of the public comments. So the only one that I can respond to is Mrs. Thompson's. And I think you did a good job illustrating one of the reasons why potentially that bond did not pass. It was not structured in a way that your taxes were going to go up 3 times and that we were going to take 3 different batches of money. It was actually structured in a way where we were going to start at one rate, and as property values went up, more than likely we would have been able to decrease the amount we were taking over the life of the bond. I'm sorry that you had that perception that taxes were going to go up 3 times. I can say unequivocally that was not the planned intent of that bond and not the likely outcome. We always have to caveat that we have to take out the money that we need. We have to take the money we need, but that is not in all likelihood what would have happened. Certainly not what would have happened with property values going up the way they have in the last 4 years. Most definitely we would have been paying less, or you would have been paying less than what we were asking you to pay in the 2020 bond election.
Thank you, Ms. Stephenson. Any other comments? I will say that coming into being new, I think right after the bond failure, maybe came on a year and a half after, I think as board president, I can assure the community of 2 things. Number one, that in our initial discussions, the board is very clear, administration is very clear and conscious that we're going to get the involvement of the community. That we're going to do our best to have, if not as many listening sessions as there were before, more, and do our best to make sure that people feel heard. The other thing as board president that I can assure you is that whatever the final bond is, that we will again do our utmost to communicate it. And that's one thing, but to communicate it clearly so that people really understand not only what we're saying, but what we're meaning. And so for me, those were the 2 biggest lessons that was learned from the last bond, that people may not have felt involved and that the communication wasn't clear. I'm still learning, Mr. Swan, what I should say and what I shouldn't say. So in that process of learning what I should say and not say, I'm going to make this statement. You tell me after the board meeting if I said right or said wrong. I think my goal is to come up with a consensus on what the community wants before we even get to the vote. That would be, to me, the best process, that we talk it through. Now, obviously, we don't want to take 2 years to do that, but my hope is that as we talk and begin these initial discussions, and again, let me just say, these are initial discussions. So if you haven't been contacted, you haven't heard anything, don't feel, we're just starting. In fact, we ain't even starting, it's pre-starting. So don't get nervous. But my goal is to hope to have that groundswell of consensus and agreement, so that by the time we get to the vote, that we can be reasonably confident that it will pass this time. All right. With that being said, we are on item number 6A, enrollment boundaries, facilities, and planning. And at this time, we'll turn it over to Superintendent Swigart and for the presentation.
Thank you, President Carr. Coy and I have put mostly Coy, has put together a presentation. I'm going to take the first few slides and then he's going to take the next few, and we will absolutely chime in and share our thoughts on each other's slides as we go through this. So tonight we're going to have a presentation that talks about enrollment, past, present, future, boundaries, current, future boundary needs, and of course, talking about the need or our belief that there is a need to have a conversation about the possibility of a bond. So starting out, our objectives are to discuss, as I said, I guess I covered this, thank you. So the enrollment, this is a really important discussion. There are different ways to determine enrollment, and it all basically comes down to what is called the SAFE number, and that is the number that the state eventually counts. However, if we're talking bodies, if we're talking students enrolled in Rapid City area schools on the final count day, and in South Dakota, the final Friday in September is the do-all, end-all of counting students and getting funding. So on September 29th this year, the number of students enrolled in Rapid City area schools was 12,532. Now, that is lower than we would like it to be. And as it has been pointed out, that there are a variety of reasons for that. We have had a significant number of families choose alternative education routes, and that is alternative to public school. This is not ADM. Historically in South Dakota, we counted enrollment and funding by what was called average daily membership. And this was actually a very interesting way to fund schools because you counted kids every single day for a whole entire year, and then you got paid for those students the following year. So it was called being paid in arrears because you were getting paid the next year after you counted. And the state determined that that was a really awkward way to pay school districts, because what if a school district had a huge increase of students and they were getting paid on last year's numbers, but they needed this year's staffing? So they changed it and they went to this final number of counting, which is the final Friday in September. But counting students enrolled is also not accurate because not all students attend full time. And we're going to get into that a little bit in the future. So this number will be kind of washed and cleaned and determined, and it will likely be somewhere in the number of 12,400. This is sad to us because we predicted that we would have 12,650 students, which was actually 15 less students than last year. So we thought we were being fairly safe in that number. That is not accurate because we are going to be significantly below that. On a 5-year enrollment trend, in 2023, we're at 12,532 on the final day. In 2022, our number was 12,665, which was down 0.36% from 2021, where our number was 12,711, which was up from 2020, where our number was 12,671, which was down 6% from 2019, where our number was 13,484. This is interesting because nationally, there is a number of students who never came back after COVID. They didn't return to school. They've talked in different states about thousands and thousands of students not walking back in school doors. So it is not just a Rapid City area school issue, it is a national issue. But it is concerning that just 4 years ago in the fall, we were over 13,000 and now we are at 12,532. So if you change that. One area that I think we have a concern is our senior statistics. And these are students who have 15 or more credits who are currently enrolled in school and are considered seniors. We have a number of students in Rapid City area schools that take less than 5 classes. And interestingly enough, the state of South Dakota, when we send in a number, we get paid for students taking 5 or more classes, the same. But if they're taking any fewer than 5 classes, our money from the state is reduced by 20% for every class less than 5 that they take. So if a student is taking 4 classes, which is the number of classes that are required by the state to be participants in any state activity, we lose 20% of our funding for that student. If they're taking 3 classes, because they were really diligent 9th, 10th, and 11th graders, they don't have to take as many classes, we lose 40%. If they're taking 2 classes, we lose 60%. And if they're only taking 1 class as a senior, we lose 80%. Interestingly enough, at Stevens High School, 53% of our seniors are not considered full-time. At Central High School, 47% of our seniors are not full-time. And this has a major impact on our safe count. So when I talked about there being 12,532 students, bodies enrolled, we're going to lose that percentage for each of the students that are not full-time. This has a very big financial cost to our district. For instance, if we had 150 students that we lost by those 20% decreases, that is a decrease of $1.1 million in our general fund. You go to the next slide. So this year, by the numbers, when I take that data that was pulled out for this year's seniors at Stevens and Central, seniors at Stevens taking less than 5 classes, when we add up all of those less than classes, it equals 64.6 students we are not going to be paid for, full amount for. And for Central, we are not going to be paid for 52.8 students. And in the online school, we are not being paid for 0.2 of 1 student. And all of those added together equals 117.6 students, or almost $1 million in revenue that we are losing in Rapid City. When I reached out to superintendents across the state and local superintendents, I found a very interesting thing out. All of the districts around us require seniors to take a minimum of 5 classes in the fall. We do not. I'm going to ask the board to consider moving forward that we make a change and require seniors in Rapid City area schools to take 5 classes in the fall. We can't afford to lose $1 million every year.
Just a quick question related to that, talking about student counts, and there's a lot of discussion about alternative education. Superintendent Swire, is it also accurate? We have alternative education students who do take classes and are provided the absolute access and right to take classes and do benefit from Rapid City area schools. But if they take 1 or 2 classes, we actually do not get payment for those. Is that accurate?
Well, we get payment for any classes they do take with us. So if an alternative education student would enroll and take orchestra, 1 class, we would get paid 20%. If they would take orchestra and chemistry, we would get paid 40%. What we don't get paid for with alternative education students is if a student is enrolled in alternative education and would like to be provided our textbooks and our access to online material, we do not get paid anything for any material that we hand out to homeschool students. And it is interesting and amazing, as I've learned in my time being up at this office, the number of books that we give out every year to alternative instruction students. That is an expectation that the state has. Another very interesting fact is, although we lose 20% for every class less than 5 a student doesn't take, we don't gain 20% for every class over 5 that a student takes. So it's kind of, I would say, this favors the Department of Education and the state funding very, very significantly, because we have many of our freshmen who take 7 or 8 classes, sophomores, even juniors. We have many students that go 6, 7, 8 periods a day with courses, but we don't get any extra money for the 6th, 7th, or 8th class that they get. But we lose money for every student taking 4, 3, or 2, or 1 class. So I do think we need to consider making a change in the near future of asking students who are seniors their fall semester to take 5 classes. Now, this wouldn't necessarily mean they have to be classes in building. They could be dual enrollment courses at WDT or any university. They could be online. They could be work study classes, where we have a pilot program going on this semester at Rapid City Alternative Academy, where students who are working part of their day are earning credit by doing some assignments about that job and that work experience. It could be elective classes. We could work in partnership with the community for volunteer hours. We have a very active opportunity to do courses, work, and a senior project class. And there's a lot of opportunities, and I think it would greatly benefit students. Although we do require 22 credits to graduate, we do have a significant number of students who graduate with more than 22. And I can speak personally for both of my daughters. They graduated with 27 and 29 credits when they graduated from high school, and it benefited them greatly.
Mr. Swan has his hand raised.
Yeah, let me, I got a note and I see your hand about comments. So I think we'd like to ask questions. Are you okay with us asking questions?
After every
wherever
slide?
Okay, wherever you are. Okay, so
Yep.
I just wanted to, all board members procedurally, that we can
Absolutely.
interrupt them to ask a question. Okay, so with that being said, the chair recognizes Mr. Swan.
Lots of great work and lots of great information that we're showing so far. And it looks, I think the plan would work out really well if we were to do what benefits us, you know what I mean? I think it's one of those things where sometimes we have to think about biting a bullet and saying, we have to do what's best for the district. And the other piece I'd like to get to is that, if you get to be a senior and say you've got eight credits left, and you decide 4 and 4, and you ask them to take 5, yet they're wanting to participate in track, would we then ask them to take another class? Or, I guess that's the only piece that I've got is that, is sometimes you set your senior year up for what you would like to do. And as young adults, it sometimes sometimes you get that feeling that, well, I'm almost done, I'm almost there, and I would hate to try to ruin that, but I do appreciate all the work you did putting all this information together.
Thank you, Mr. Swan. I would like to break down a couple of things that you asked. So the way credits work in high school is students get a half a credit for a semester. So if you're taking English all year, you get a half a credit for the fall semester and a half a credit for the spring semester. So if we say take 5 classes, we're not saying 5 credits, we're saying take 2.5 credits, but that would be 5 class periods a day. Because both Central and Stevens are on traditional scheduling currently. So a student would be expected to take 5 classes a day. Now, that would absolutely mean they could still be out of the building by 1 o'clock in the afternoon if they came in early, or they could come in a little bit later and sleep in and stay until 3:30. Students who are participating in any activity have to be enrolled in 4 classes, so 2 credits, the semester of that activity. So if they're participating in football, they have to be enrolled in 4 classes in the fall. Volleyball, 4 classes in the fall. But if it's wrestling or basketball, you have to be enrolled in 4 classes both semesters. And if it's a spring sport like track or boys tennis and girls golf, it's 4 classes in the spring. And my daughters had to do that because they were athletes and involved in activities. So I think it's important to realize that classes and credits are a little bit different because credits are a full year class and classes are a class period. But I do appreciate you pointing that out. I do think it's important to recognize that by doing this in the fall, seniors would still in January have a lot of flexibility and freedom. Some students may choose to graduate early and be completely done at semester time because they could take more classes in the fall. They could still participate in graduation and do things in May with their senior class. We absolutely allow that. So there's some opportunities. I do think one of the things that we need to consider is if we make this move, do we move it out a couple of years for instance, if we were talking about making the change for this year's freshmen, we wouldn't start this until the fall of 2027. This year's sophomores, we would start at the fall of 26. This year's juniors, we would start at the fall of 24. So I guess it'd be 26, 25, 24. So we have to determine when we want to take the leap, if we want to make the change. But as I said, I asked all the local region superintendents, they all require 5 classes. Many require it the whole senior year. They don't even break it down to the fall. But some of the large school districts just require 5 classes for all students in the fall so that they get counted. Because that's where, remember, we count the last Friday in September. It's not that average daily membership anymore. It's that last Friday in September. So it's making the best decision with our student population to get the most credit from the state. Any other questions on this slide?
Yeah, briefly, to be clear, is it ever the case that if a senior took 8 classes, they wouldn't be able to participate in a sport because practices are scheduled during school hours?
No practices are scheduled during school hours.
So 8 classes, they can take whatever they want.
Yeah.
I just want to say, I feel like public education is a gift that we give our kids. And I've always been uncomfortable with the fact that they can go through senior year only taking 1 or 2 classes. I feel like the whole message sent is like public education is something to get behind you, get out of the way. And I mean, I know my nieces and my daughter are probably like, come on, Christine, keep your mouth shut. But it's a gift, it's an opportunity. There are a lot of opportunities in our high schools that I think we don't do our kids a favor by saying, oh, sure, you can just take 2 classes senior year. We should force them to take more.
I would agree that it gives a lot of opportunity to take things and test things out before you're paying for classes in college. I also worry if a student is college bound, I worry about them getting out of the habit of study and then having to jump back into college in that fall and being like, well, last year I only took 1 class, so I'm not in the practice of this. And as far as the students who move right into the world of work, and I recognize that we have many students who make that leap. If they are not working in their senior year and they're only taking 1 class, we are also not preparing them to work a full-time job. So school really is a student's job. And I think sometimes we've moved away from that in society. And I wish that we recognize that as what our students should be concentrating on and getting as much education as they can. Anyone else?
Ms. Swan, you still have your hand up. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so my next topic, that was enrollment. And I guess one last statement on enrollment. Although we recognize that enrollment is declining, I do believe that many students will be returning to public education. I fully believe that Rapid City Area School is embracing transparency with parents. All of our students' class structures, especially in high school and middle school, are posted. The syllabi is posted. It is accessible on our website. It's not getting very much traffic. It's not being accessed very much, but it is all there. It has to be updated continually. So I think we're being very transparent. I think many misconceptions about public education is a national misconception that Rapid City area schools may be suffering from, but it's not suffering because we are involved in that. It is just suffering because that is the narrative out in the national scene. Okay, so my next topic is boundary issues. Last spring, the board voted to close Canyon Lake in May of 2024. That has been a voted decision. It is what is in place to happen. But that does require some shifts in our boundaries. We had a little bit of a discussion about this last year, but I want to go into some more details. When Canyon Lake closes at the end of this school year, we are going to have to redraw our boundaries so that students can go into room in our current buildings. The buildings that will be impacted by that are Meadowbrook and Knollwood will absorb the most students from Canyon Lake. And I'll go into some details about why that is, because they're on way different sides of town. So some people may be wondering why that is the case. That is the schools closest to the majority of the students at Canyon Lake currently. The boundary changes will also impact Pinedale, South Canyon, General Beetle, Knollwood, and Meadowbrook, as I said, and we will finalize these actual boundary specific changes in the spring. Those are coming, but looking at the numbers, this is what we'd be changing the boundaries. This is what would happen. Pinedale would have 20 more students based on these boundary changes. South Canyon would have 30 more. General Beetle would have 17 more. Knollwood would have 144 more, and Meadowbrook would have 84 more. So if we click to the next slide, I can explain this. All the arrows in color are mine, so I apologize. It's hard to draw on a computer screen. This is Canyon Lake. So if you look in the middle of the picture there, up towards the right by the red arrow, that's Canyon Lake Elementary. This is west up at the very top. Canyon Lake is right, that white building right below, no, down. That's the church. Right there. That's Canyon Lake. So if you are in Canyon Lake's current boundary and you are in above the red line, those students above the red line would go to South Canyon. On the blue line, that is coming off of Jackson Boulevard, Canyon Lake Drive, and then the one way that goes down from Stevens, it's like Reddale. Everybody on the west of that line would go to Pinedale. Everything else in that middle area is the Canyon Lake territory, the main part of Canyon Lake, which is right now, Canyon Lake has 281 students. About 120 or 30 of those students are Canyon Lake area nearest the school, right there. The other area below the red line that is in Canyon Lake area would go to Meadowbrook, and that's where the purple arrow points at, down there at the bottom. So Canyon Lake South. Canyon Lake Drive South would go to Meadowbrook. And if you go back a slide, Coy, thank you. That is 84 students plus 30 plus 20. So about 134 students right there in Canyon Lake. Thank you. If you advance twice. Okay, then there's that, who goes to Knollwood then? Currently, right now, the way the boundaries are drawn so that we had a student population that kept Canyon Lake occupied. Everything north of the mall, so I have two slides here. If you look at the slide that has the yellow shading, that's all of the Canyon Lake area that is bused currently all the way from north of the mall all the way over to Canyon Lake. All of that in the yellow would go to Knollwood. And Knollwood, if you look at the side with the yellow arrow, it's just on the other side of the interstate, so just south of I-90.
Hmm.
Any questions about that?
Chair recognizes Mrs. Stephenson.
Do those families, are they in the they're in the 2.5 miles, so they lose busing to school?
Well, actually, they wouldn't lose busing because we do have a rule in our district. If you cross a major thoroughfare, we bus. And the I-90 would definitely be considered a major thoroughfare. So they would still be bused to Knollwood Elementary. If you look at that, I always say north of the mall, but it's actually, if you go further out Haynes, it's past Haynes after, I think, Ashley Furniture, and then curves kind of around behind the mall. That would be, those students would be transported to Knollwood. So if you click one more, I said General Beetle had a little bit of an impact, right? So what we did is we took everybody that is south of Anamosa that was in Knollwood's district, and we moved those students down to General Beetle. So that's the impact. Mr. Swan? Oh, may I recognize Mr. Swan?
Technically, no.
Okay.
But the chair will recognize Mr. Swan.
I can wait outside, I guess. No. Obviously, these are a lot of constituents for me, and there were a lot of concerns about the neighborhood, as it was termed when I was running for office, that neighborhood is unsafe. And I know that you've had conversations with, I believe you call it the Big Five, and everybody was had these conversations. And one of the conversations that I had with one individual is that, you know, I think the idea that we could probably involve the police department to maybe come and share some statistics about the neighborhood, maybe, and maybe talk about, you know, that the busing isn't ceasing, you know, things like that, because those are the things that were most concerning to everybody there, was that, you know, how safe is the neighborhood? You know, how many times they got on lockdown? How many times has this happened? You know, and it just, it became concerning to me after a while, you know, and I live in North Rapid as well, but it's one of those things where I'd really like to, you know, I guess, drill down a little bit, just so we can get some understanding of what's going on and what's taking place, so that it's not every day that we're on lockdown. It's not every week that happens, you know, and I think that was the most concerning piece. So any information that we can get from the police department or sheriff's department or anything of that nature would be very helpful as well in concerns of the people I had spoken to when I was walking the neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Swan.
Sure.
I would,
Gonna respond?
I will respond just a little bit. If you live in this community, I think there is some awareness of there being some legal consideration, some law enforcement presence in different parts of town. We can have a lockdown or secure your room for any law enforcement's presence near any building. And we have had those at West Side schools, and we have had those in South Side schools and in downtown schools and in North Rapid. If there's any concern of law enforcement in a neighborhood, they ask us out of the abundance of caution to secure the room. And secure means, and I think this is super important, secure the room means learning is still happening. We're not hiding. The lights aren't turned down. The blinds aren't pulled. We're not cowering. We are conducting business as usual. So I think that the law enforcement officers anywhere around town, if they are converging on an event that they have concern about, they'll ask us to secure, but we're still holding class. I have talked in depth with law enforcement about some actions that has taken place in North Rapid. They have added a substation, they've also added a substation in West Rapid as well. They're trying to spread out and do some more community policing, it's called, and have a more presence and not just have everybody downtown at one police shop. So there are substations going out. The mall has a substation, then there's a substation up by the movie theater. There's a presence in a lot of areas of town. I know that there is concern by people about what may or may not be happening in North Rapid. But these schools have not had any lockdown event on campus. And I think that's important too. We have secured in all parts of town, Stevens, West, Blackhawk. You can secure your room in any part of town, but we haven't locked down the schools unless there's a presence on campus. That's what a lockdown is. So thank you.
The chair recognizes Mrs. Clapham.
I'll try to be concise. One thing to point out, I think, as we talk about boundaries, and is very important for the public to know, is that typically in districts, boundaries are reassessed every 5 to 7 years. So what's actually happened in the district and how it happened, it doesn't really matter. But redistricting probably should have happened long ago anyway. So I think there is a little bit of a lack of, we've gotten spoiled that, oh, well, for 10, 12 years, we've sat with these boundaries, but truly, we see nobody would have predicted 15 years ago the growth in the valley. So that's why that is actually supposed to happen, and something that when we talk about strategic planning, to put in place for when we are not in these seats anymore, that reassessment is happening. So I think that's something the community needs to be aware of. I know sometimes you say, I bought my house right here, and this is, but there is no set in stone guaranteed plan that this district will remain the same for the next eternity. So I think that's one thing that we need to be really, really aware of. The other thing I think Walt, seeing specifically when people talk about security, and I've heard some of the same questions, out in the community, I think it is important to recognize the structure, the way Knollwood's built, it's actually easier to secure than Canyon Lake is. Canyon Lake, with all of the annexes and building and students walking in between, and there's a lot of times that they're unsupervised. We said a third grader has to go to the nurse's office, that they've got to walk from this side of Canyon Lake to this. I mean, I've been there, it's a long way. So that's something that I also emphasize to community and parents. When you look at security, also the design of the building and the access of the building, and Knollwood's design is actually much easier to secure than some of the other buildings because of their annexes. So that's something that when you're talking to the community, say, it's actually easier when you don't have multiple annexes and those things. So just something to think about when you address safety in the community and building.
So Mrs. Clapham, I want to anchor on a couple of things that you said, because I'm very thankful that you brought them up, and I didn't even ask you to, so thank you. We have more than 20 annexes in our district, and when annexes were created, they were created as temporary educational structures, and they have just become a very significant way of life. But annexes actually started before school safety was a hot button issue. They wouldn't be constructed these days, absolutely. As a safety issue, that would not be happening. The other thing that you mentioned is boundaries. Typically, a whole district boundary survey is done about every 5 years. What we have historically done in Rapid City is we have done small area boundary shifts and not a wide boundary study. But we have in North Rapid, we have sent at various points when East and Valley View were new and not full, we sent part of North Rapid, East North area out to the Valley. Then the Valley got more crowded, so we brought everybody back to General Beetle. We have made shifts in South Rapid. As schools got full, we moved some people over to West Rapid. We have made a lot of shifts. Part of Stevens has changed over time. So sometimes people think, well, that house is closer to Central physically, but they're actually in Stevens district. And that is all about trying to equalize our student limits at buildings. And I just find it really interesting because as the crow flies, like my house is closer to Central, but my daughters were boundaried into Stevens. They did transfer into open enroll into or personal transfer into Central, and that is an opportunity in our district, but there are shifts. So I wanted to point that out. So thank you very much.
I want to say a couple of things to the community, that one of the top priorities, if not the top priority, for this board is the safety of all kids. And we, in fact, it's part of the, if you look at the strategic plan, part of the statement, if I'm not mistaken, talks about kids being able to go to a safe school. And to that point, when I first got on the board, and thanks to Superintendent Swigert, who followed up, we had a safety evaluation done on every school. Not only did we have that done so that plan is implemented, we also hired specifically a safety manager. What's his position called?
School safety manager.
School safety manager, whose only job or main job is to make sure, number one, that plan is followed, and to make sure that every school in our district is secure. And so I just want to just let the community know and parents know that we are adamant and purposeful about making sure that schools are safe. All schools are safe. Also, this is more of a question. I think the other thing is that parents and families have been spoiled by the concept of open enrollment, that no matter where I live in town, my kid can go to whatever school. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that was a luxury that we had several years ago, that is no longer a luxury now. And so I think we need to communicate and that really your families are responsible, kids are responsible for going to schools in their boundaries. And open enrollment is not a right, it's a luxury that we used to have that we don't have. Is that statement correct?
Thank you, Bishop Carr. That is very correct. When we had more students and more funding, we actually had the ability to look at a building and its capacity and staff at what we knew was the possibility of personal transfers into that building. However, we have made a very strategic shift about 3 years ago, and that was before I was superintendent, but the shift was made to staff based on the student population of that area. And we no longer have a bunch of extra wiggle room or staffing at buildings for students to come into. What that means is we will staff a building at the staffing level of the population of that neighborhood. And that may mean that in second grade, any given year, that we need to have 2 teachers because 32 kids is too big for one room. So we staff 2 teachers at 16, and there may be some wiggle room in those 2 second grade classrooms. However, that is not guaranteed that it's going to be wiggle room the next year. And one of the concepts with personal transfers has always been you transfer into a building and your child you magically get your number called and you get to transfer into a building and your child gets to stay there the entire time they're at that level. So kindergarten through 5th grade. And then you had to personal transfer into a middle school if you wanted to, and you got to stay all through middle school. And then you could personal transfer into a high school if you wanted to. The reality though is those numbers can change significantly every single year. And people are personal transferring in and then losing that personal transfer the next year and having to go back to a home building or then try to personal transfer somewhere else. And it's a lot of hopping around. And we are trying to more responsibly staff our buildings financially. So thank you. This is not just a Canyon Lake closing boundary discussion though. We all know and we're excited. South Middle School will be opening in the fall of 2024, and its new capacity will be 850 students. It will be our largest middle school. Currently, Southwest Middle School has an enrollment of 672 students with a capacity of what they say is 710, but if you've been to Southwest, it is the most crowded. It is the fullest middle school. It is the largest middle school we currently have. So the board in this boundary discussion may want to consider adjusting boundaries to move some current Southwest students into the new South Middle School. So if you click on that, I can show you some bad pictures of my drawing as well. So in the picture with my drawing on it, the teal circle is South Middle School. The purple is my best rendition of areas of town that we are currently sending over to Southwest. So it's kind of down by the South Walmart we're moving. So if you look over to the picture on the right, that whole big light green shaded area is Southwest Middle School. So you can see at the kind of a very edge of the yellow, that is Highway 16. So there's a whole bunch of area that is to the south and east of Highway 16 that is currently pulling over to Southwest. That would make a lot of sense to pull that section into South Middle School. So the areas by South Rapid City, all the way out to like Rockerville and heading kind of over to the Highway 79 Hart Ranch area. There's a big swab of land there that we could pull over to South Middle School, give some relief to Southwest, and put some more students in our newest flagship building. Any questions that Bishop Carr would like to recognize the question asker?
I just want to make a statement again to our bosses, the community, to please be understanding as we go through this process, because it is going to affect some families as we change boundaries, and that, you know, we're not doing it out of a whim. We're not doing it political reasons, or it's really a numbers game, not game, but numbers reality. And as Superintendent Swigert just mentioned, to relieve pressure from one school and add students to a school that has the capability. So as we know, it's going to affect some families. I'm just asking for your patience if this boundary change affects your family. Seeing no hands.
So other boundary issues that we would need to consider is the valley area. It continues to be the most rapidly growing area of the community. So Valley View is currently at 95% capacity. It is our largest elementary school in the district. East Middle School is at 70% capacity. A lot of that is because of open enrollment or personal transfers to other middle schools. And that might be a case of being closer to where the parent works for activities and things like that. But there is a difference there. Rapid Valley is also at 87% of capacity. Mr. Coy and I did have a conversation with a local developer last week, and we just kind of wanted to get a clue on where housing shifts may happen the most in the future. And we were told that the Valley area in South and Southwest area has the greatest potential for the fastest growth. And so Mr. Sassy is going to hit on that in a few minutes. The other area to consider is South Rapid City in the Southwest area. There is the potential for about 2,500 new homes to be developed out Sheridan Lake Road and between Sheridan Lake Road and Highway 16 and going over a little bit further over to Highway 79. 2,500 single family homes. We know that there are thousands of homes slated to be built in the Valley. The Valley is interesting because we butt up against Douglas in the Valley, and we also butt up against a little bit of New Underwood and a little bit of Meade County. So it's kind of interesting the way that plays out there. But we do have district area out to Caputa, so past the airport. But the airport towards Box Elder becomes Douglas, and past Caputa kind of becomes New Underwood. So it's really interesting. Out past Hart Ranch becomes the Hermosa, Custer area. We do obviously butt up against Meade County in the Piedmont Valley area, and there's growth happening out there as well. But our biggest boundary considerations, other than Canyon Lake closure and the new South Middle School, are these two areas. So I wanted to show that.
Good job.
Okay.
Can I? Question before we move on.
Oh,
Sure.
yeah, Miss Bishop Carr has to give you permission.
Go ahead.
Thanks. So my question is, you showed us schools that are at 94, 95, 87% capacity. What do we have schools? What's the floor? Or do we have schools with 60% capacity after we close Canyon Lake and fill Knollwood up? Where are the other schools at?
We can certainly show some of that. I don't have a listing, in terms of a itemized right now. I'm going to show a map here in just a moment that'll have a lot of that info in there. Don't have it itemized and broken down at this point.
So I guess the bigger picture I'm trying to get is, we close Canyon Lake. Are we filling up everywhere, or are we just filling up in these areas?
So last spring, when we talked about the closure of Canyon Lake, and the question was, how can we close it when we haven't built anything? And the reality was that we had room in all of the buildings where students would be sent to. So we had significant room at Knollwood, because over time, that population, number of students in its immediate draw, it had shrunk. Boundaries had shrunk for Knollwood and hadn't increased when we had growth in North Rapid. We had actually shrunk that, because at one point Knollwood was pulling in some Valley students. Knollwood had room, Meadowbrook has room that is it's currently, space is being utilized, but it's being utilized for services for kids. Maybe literacy specialists or a math specialist, STEAM rooms. So there's not just empty space, we use all the space, but in reality, there's classroom space that we can allocate for classrooms in all of these buildings. It is a whole different conversation when we look at our concerns in South Rapid. So as was mentioned during open forum, we have a crack in the foundation at Robbinsdale. It is a huge concern. We don't have classroom space in South Rapid to send Robbinsdale kids to until we do something with a building. We either need to build onto a property that exists, we need to expand on that, or we need to build a new elementary school. We have no classrooms to send Robbinsdale kids to. We've also had conversations in this room and in other spaces about Wilson. We also do not have classroom room in downtown or South Rapid for Wilson students. So those are the reasons that those two buildings are not being talked about being closed at this time, because we have no space. Whereas in West Rapid, we had space, and in North Rapid, we had space. So that is why we were able, just based on the boundaries, the way they were for Canyon Lake, we didn't have 300 students trying to fit into one area of town, because half were coming from North Rapid and half were local. All of the kids at Robbinsdale are in South Rapid. All of the kids in Wilson are coming from the part of town that feeds into the Wilson area. So we can't have those conversations until we make a facilities plan that gives us space
Mhm.
to do something. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and then a follow-up as we go into talking about bond considerations. Is it true to say that like if Robbinsdale was fine and Wilson was fine, we have the space for all of the kids who are currently enrolled? Maybe it's geographically not ideal, but we have
Yes,
space for the kids. So when we enter a bond discussion, we are talking not about creating more spaces, we're creating better space for the students that we have, safer,
Yeah.
more conducive to learning.
you're going to see, you took the air out of our sails. Thank you very much.
Sorry.
We are going to talk in Rapid City area schools moving forward about better educational spaces and environments that are better for learning and teaching our students that we have right now. Better, not bigger. Better for the kids that we have. Obviously, you know, the predicted growth has not panned out. Do I believe that in the future, public education in Rapid City area schools will see growth? I believe that. I absolutely believe that. But our conversation today is not about building for bigger. It is about building for better, which is what our community and our students deserve. Thank you.
Good segues all around. I think it's nice to have resources. So Mr. Jay Clement down here is the district's construction and planning manager. He says he has that information, so we'll get that out to everybody, Christine. Good segue, and couple things. I'm going to show everyone a map of the district because I think it starts to bridge these two conversations between boundary considerations and then moving into some of the discussion about the bond. Prior to that, I want to make a disclaimer. President Carr has said it a couple of times. I think it's worth reiterating again that this is, for all intents and purposes, a warm-up conversation. We talked about the idea at the retreat that the bond is a heavy lift and it requires a ton of mechanisms coming together, a lot of conversation. So throughout the remainder of these slides, you're going to see a lot of information. So everybody listening at home and everyone here, these are not meant to be anything that is set in stone. These are meant as conversation starters, things to get your brain working and thinking around all of these different scenarios and how we bring this information together, ultimately, if you wish, to formulate a package to take out to the community. So with that understanding, I'm going to go out of here for one moment and I'm going to bring this map up. So this is a district map. Of course it's not. Let me. I'm a tech wizard, so I will figure it out. There we go. Okay, so this is a current map of the district. It's busy. There's a lot of stuff going on. It's the best we could pull it together right now. So at the current buildings, you're going to see several numbers. So let's take Valley View, for example. That's a little bit easier to see out here on the right. So the first number in this side is the building capacity. The second number is the current enrollment. And the third number is the total amount of acres owned at that site. So you see between the Valley View and East Middle School facility, we own about 65.4 acres. And that is depicted by this orange block here. What's really important as we enter into these conversations, again, in terms of trying to really fully understand and grasp what is happening in our community, what is happening in our district, and then plan for that, is probably these red circled areas. So all of the red circled areas are property that the district has acquired over time that as of now is open land. That has not been developed. So we'll start just here on the southwest corner. So this would be out Sheridan Lake Road in Dunsmore. The district owns a property. We call it the Ham property. Former owner was Leo Ham. And this is about a 50-acre plot. So sits up, if you're familiar with where the gas station is on the south side of Sheridan Lake Road, very near to that area. Moving into town, this is the Parkview property complex. The district owns 107.25 acres there. However, about 55 acres of that is usable. So on this right side is where the city pool complex, the softball complex all resides, and obviously that is not usable property. And then you can't see it real well, but this right here is where Fifth Street splits that property. On the west side of Fifth Street, the district has deemed that not the best property, and the board has declared it surplus, and we're working through some issues there, and hopefully we'll have that land on the market sometime in the near future. So it leaves about 50 acres of usable property right in this area. As we move to the east, we have what we call the Lamb property. Again, former owner's name was Lamb. This is an 80-acre plot, very near the Elks Golf Course, and back behind this residential area here. I believe it's called Elk Ridge. No, Elk something. Anyway, very near Elks Golf Course. Moving north to the north of Valley View, and on the opposite side of Elkvale Road, the district, this is the most recently acquired property called the Shepherd Hills property. That's 51.4 acres. So you can see sits back behind this residential area and very near the Menards area. Lots and lots of development happening in that area, already encroaching on this property. And then to the north, north of the interstate, this would be past the mall area, Best Buy Lowe's area out here, is the Vicky Powers property. That is about 12.3 acres. So the smallest plot that we currently have unoccupied. So that's a breakdown of where the district currently has property available. Again, I think important to understand as we get deeper into this conversation. So I'm going to go back to my slideshow. Yes, sir. Yeah. Oh, good. I'm glad.
How big, because I mean,
Yeah.
it's simple to understand what
Yeah.
everything is, where the options, yeah. How big can we get this blown up?
I would say pretty big. I'm gonna defer that to Jay, but I think we could. Oh, there's Kathy. Yeah, so Kathy, yeah, Kathy's the map.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it is very helpful.
yeah.
We want a big one.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really fantastic. And it really helps to understand, back to your question, Christine, like what is the impact of some of this movement? And as we're talking boundaries and we're talking facilities, it becomes really, really difficult to grasp what that's going to look like and the impact it's going to have without a tool like this. So good job, Kathy.
If you are going to print that, please make a typo. Property is spelled wrong.
Yeah, I saw that. That's Kathy's fault as well. Just make sure we point that out. She was under intense pressure as we were having these discussions, so. No, great job, Kathy. We'll get it out to everybody. We'll get some printed, you bet. Okay. If I can figure this out so I can see the same screen you all are. Nope. Okay, let me try something. There we go. Okay. So, I think it's absolutely a must in starting this discussion to, face the idea that the facility situation of this district is just really complex. The average age of our buildings is 53 years old. Oldest building, of course, being Wilson, built in 1929. Sure. Yep. Good point. Newest building, East Middle School, 2012. Of course, South will be newest when that is complete next year. Which makes the average year built of our buildings 1965. I think in addition to that, it's easy to lose sight of the massive amount of area that this district covers. So we have 2.5 million square feet of building space spread out over 600 acres of property. So in general, I think trying to get our minds around how difficult this situation is, and as we move this discussion out into the community, it's important to note how complex that picture is. As we talked about at the board retreat, the general obligation bond is the mechanism designated for large scale construction. As we're aware, the last bond was passed in 1973. So for 50 years, the district has relied on its capital outlay fund to deal with its major large scale building issues. And I think there's been a thought that the district has not used those resources well, and that more should have been done or different things should have been done. I would take the opposite stance. I would say that the district has accomplished a significant amount of building projects during that time period, relying solely on capital outlay in the form of issuing capital outlay certificates. I'm going to take another shot at navigating around this. Actually, that's not what I wanted to do. So here's an idea. Since that point in time, all the projects that the district has completed using capital outlay as the funding source. That's a significant amount of projects, hundreds of millions of dollars that the district has accomplished. Whoops, sorry. The issue becomes, because that is really not the purpose of capital outlay, that the debt service from those projects highly leverages that fund. And as we've talked about often in the past, that is a really broad area of needs that the district serves through that fund. And so as you leverage the capital outlay fund, there then is less money to flow out to building maintenance, preventative maintenance, and really those other high need capital outlay areas. So I do want to show you this chart. So this is a chart for basically the last 11 fiscal years, fiscal year 11 to fiscal year 22. The green is the amount of money flowed directly into facilities. So through maintenance projects, renovation, those types of projects direct out to the buildings. And that made up about 45% of total expenses. The blue chunk is debt service. So capital outlay certificates issued to build buildings, major expansion, renovation, those types of things. And that was 31% over that 11-year period. So between these two categories, 76% of the district's capital outlay resources were flowing to facilities during that time period, either through the form of debt or direct projects. Now, again, that highly leverages a really small pool of money and a small pool of resources that has a broad category of needs. And what ends up happening is it puts the district into what I think of as this snowball cycle of addressing facility needs, where the district continues to fall further and further behind over time because we just don't have the resources in capital outlay to keep up with the laundry list of needs that we have. And so this snowball continues to mount and mount and mount until we get to a point very similar where we are today, where we would have the district would have a very, very difficult time ever addressing all of the needs it has simply through capital outlay. It's near what I would say is impossible, speaking from a financial perspective. So, sorry, as we've discussed, it's a really complex task to think about how we address urgent needs, things that are happening today, but also look into the future and try to do the best that we can to put the district on a better track, a more realistic track in terms of its facilities as we move into this conversation. And a great example of that is enrollment. Nicole did a great job of covering that. Enrollment has been erratic, especially as you saw over that last 4 to 5 year period. But it's unlikely, given our community indicators and the things we see happening around us, that it won't eventually grow. But as Nicole addressed earlier, and Christine, you pointed at this earlier, the need is not only driven by growth, and at this point, we would say more driven by the idea of meeting our community where it's at. Population shifts that happen as a natural byproduct in a community, the valley growing, the corridor around the south and southwest part of town growing, really dictate where we move as we move into the future. And again, it's about us meeting the community where it's at. And also the need for equity. Obviously, as we look around the district, it's safe to say that there are students in very, very drastically different building situations. And I think it would be hard to argue the idea that the Canyon Lake experience is equitable to the Valley View experience and or the Corral Drive experience. And so really it's about this idea of building better, not bigger. And I will give Nicole credit, who actually stole that line from Mayor Solomon in a conversation she was involved with him a couple weeks ago. And we both were like, that's exactly right. And that's where we want to head. The idea being not necessarily that we're trying to build bigger, but that we're trying to build better. And we're trying to do better for our students and all of our stakeholders. And so that's really the idea behind this. Okay, moving into some facility thoughts, and this is where I can get really nerdy and get into the nuts and bolts of this thing. So again, disclaimer, this is not meant to be a package. This is meant to start the conversation, to start you thinking, to give you some idea of what costs might look like. And it's really been based around Nicole and I's thoughts on conversations that we've had with you, we've had with the different committees. And again, meant to facilitate discussion. So here are some of the high need areas that throughout our conversations we've heard discussed. So obviously new elementary, fairly high on that list of needs. Estimated cost for a 650 capacity elementary, somewhere around 40 to 45 million. I should also say the complexity of this in the next few slides that you will see also lies in the idea that we're trying to think out at this point, 2 to 3 years into the future, because as we've talked about, if we passed the bond tomorrow, it would still be a year to a year and a half before financing was in place and shovels were in the dirt. So keep in mind, as Mr. Clement is helping us through this conversation and formulating some of these estimates, we're also asking him to think about what's inflation doing as we move into the future, so that we have reasonable numbers. So I should have mentioned that. But again, estimated cost for 650 capacity building, 40 to 45 million. I think some of the considerations, or the primary consideration being that that's placed in an area that can alleviate the greatest amount of capacity issues, again, both now and as we move into the nearer future of the district. So for example, Shepherd Hills location, the location that we showed you near Menards in the Valley area, really would give the ability to address growth areas in the Valley and then up along that northern corridor of the city as well, where we could reasonably pull some of that enrollment down to that location. We've also talked about the idea of expansion of current attendance centers. Approximate cost for a 200 student expansion would be somewhere in the $20 to $22 million range. Now, that includes renovations to the existing building to be able to bring systems up into place where it would make sense as they patch into a new portion of the building. So that's not all just cost for the expansion. It's also cost for the necessary renovation piece of that. Again, considerations on this idea are it utilizes facilities and land that are already established. So it really helps to reduce that cost of not having to build new or build from scratch every time. And certainly we do have sites that are conducive to that type of expansion that have large land areas that buildings our current buildings are built in the way that expansion is conducive. So South Park, Grandview, Rapid Valley, Meadowbrook would all be great candidates for expansion. Something that we've talked a lot about, not necessarily in a public forum, but often in strategic meetings, has been the idea of a sports complex. So right now, the district, and for many years, has leased the South Dakota School of Mines and Technology facility. At this point in time, that lease is up to about $70,000 per year. That has happened for a very long period of time. So safe to say the district has spent millions and millions of dollars to lease that facility. So the idea has been, hey, it would be great to have a complex we could call our own that would serve our scheduling needs. So for a nice sports complex, turf field, regulation track, track event areas, steel grandstands, locker rooms, concessions, fencing, parking lot, estimate would be somewhere in the $8 to $10 million range. Obviously, lots of discussion around a CTE facility and the need for a facility to house that function. Really highly dependent on whether the district would choose to purchase an existing property and renovate it or a from scratch build. So hard to really even assign a dollar amount. I mean, the estimate on the low end could be 5 million, on the high end could be whatever your brains could imagine. But we have toured existing facilities. We do have some thoughts on some things that are currently on the market that we've explored a bit. And as this conversation progresses, we'll continue to bring those back. Oops, I'm sorry, I doubled up the CTE facility portion. So moving down, some of the high priority renovations and things that we talked about a lot. Again, as President Carr points out, primary concern always being safety. And one of the really glaring areas right now in terms of safety needs are around secure entrances to the building. So the ability to essentially have a separation from the main entrance of the building to the remainder of the building. So some of the high need areas around the district, Blackhawk, Grandview, Horace Mann, Knollwood, Meadowbrook, Stevens, all would be in need of secure entrance renovations. Estimate on that, somewhere in the $1.45 million range. That was based on 5 schools. Obviously, that number could slide up or down depending on how much of a priority that became. And then, of course, talked about this a lot in the past, some HVAC and efficiency upgrades in terms of energy out of the buildings. So we could list a really extensive list of schools that need that. However, in these high need schools, keep in mind that's also based on the idea of can that building even support the necessary upgrades to the infrastructure to upgrade their HVAC system. So Grandview, Blackhawk, Rapid Valley, Horace Mann are all in the condition that we could move forward fairly quickly on an HVAC upgrade project. So estimate just over $11 million. And that was based on those 4 schools. So for example, if we totaled all that up on the low end, that would be 106 million. On the high end, 132 million. Again, totally meant to get gears moving, to help you think about approximate numbers that we're looking at for different facilities, and what that could look like when it's all brought together.
Yeah, okay, so 2 questions. Secure entrances, 1.45, and you said 5 schools, but I see
Yeah, 6.
5 schools plus Stevens. I
Yeah,
imagine Stevens would bring that up quite a bit, or which 5 schools is that? 5 elementary?
it was 5 elementaries. Yep, but added Stevens because of course, Stevens could certainly fit in there. Again, just meant to start thinking. Obviously that can slide up or down. Not even necessarily that these would be the highest priorities that would come out of a conversation like
Sure.
that, but just.
And then can you go back to the addition one? The 22 million expansion.
You bet.
So that's to say we would get room for 200 more students, plus the existing structure would be upgraded to the point that like, there's some equity there. You'd walk into General Beetle and you'd walk into South Park and be like,
Right.
these are both similarly styled schools
Yep.
and.
Yes, ma'am. Well said. Yep.
That's-
So, yeah, and I'm not the expert. Jade could speak to this as well, but exactly as you said, wanting them to appear uniform, appear nice, have some equity between the 2 buildings. Of course, make sure systems are supported on both sides, HVAC systems, energy systems, those types of things. Yep, absolutely.
Before I recognize any more hands, are you done with your presentation?
I think we have 1 or 2 more slides, sir. Very close.
Board, what I would like to do is, because 6B, the discussion with the bond is, basically we're having that discussion now. So we'll just flow into that 6B all within this same.
You didn't trust us.
No, yeah, we'll just, that agenda item, so technically we're on 6A and 6B, and we'll just make it one discussion. Thank you for that. The chair recognizes Mrs. Clapham.
So I have a couple of questions for Jade, I think are probably the best. So, thank you for being here, first of all, and the hard work you do. Is it meaningful to say when we look at our most critical status buildings, that in, say, a 3-year range, it would be possible that it would not be safe for students to occupy the building? Is that fair to say?
It's possible. There are definitely some schools that could use a little more attention than others. I think we've taken steps to monitor and keep track of those things. But as of now, I would say there's no immediate concern on that.
And the other question, when we talk about HVAC, and I think the first thing people pop up is, air conditioning.
Mhm.
But it's also, I've talked to several teachers in buildings, because of all HVAC, are there also some air quality concerns? Is the fact
Yep.
that we have HVAC? So I think that, we talk about buildings, I think sometimes it's oh, this pretty shiny thing, but also that there are health considerations in these buildings that we're talking about, that we're not just saying, oh, we just need to put in air conditioning, but no, we actually need filtering and mold mitigation and all. Is that?
Yes, so that's included. And to add to that as well, buildings and grounds, they do air quality testing throughout the schools, and we get questions all the time on air quality. So I know John and his team they do that regularly. But as far as upgrading the HVAC equipment, yeah, that's any addition, renovation that I was looking at on here, that's included. I think there's a lot of structures, duct-wise, that could really use some upgrading throughout the district. I mean, that's something that, you know, we've retrofitted for decades and it could use an upgrade. And I would say that's kind of a blanket statement throughout a lot of different schools.
Thank you very much.
Anything else?
Yes.
Pull your mic closer. The chair recognizes Mr. Swan.
Thank you, President Carr. Corey, just a couple questions, I guess. We go back to the sports complex and we're talking about, you know, the amount of money there to build a sports complex, $8 to $10 million. Now, is this gonna be, I hate to say this, but I'm going to, is this going to be like something we can rent out? You know what I mean, as well? You know, that we don't have, where it's not just Rapid City area schools, you know, there's also St. Thomas More is also, you know, everybody else is, you know, wants a bigger stadium, wants bigger, something bigger, you know what I mean, to host events. And I don't know if that's in the works or in the drawings or whatever it is. It's just something that, you know, I know we've used tech forever. You know what I mean? Ever since I've attended school, you know, it's just one of those things where we're gonna do it. Let's do it right. You know what I mean? That would be my suggestion for that. As well, I would be remiss if I did not say this, but I did spend the first day of school with the North Middle School staff. And they wanted me to remind you that they were the only middle school that did not have air conditioning. Are they anywhere near the top of the list or the never to be considered list? Just checking.
Sure.
We have a ton of schools that don't have AC. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but something, I want to say it's like 12 schools don't have any AC. And the problem with North is, one, the size of the building. It would take a ridiculous amount of money. I shouldn't say ridiculous, but it would take a lot of money just to get that upgraded. I would say it's not out of the question, but we also have needs all throughout the district.
So, thanks, Shade. Couple things. I say this often, and this is not lip service. I mean this. I think I take my role here very seriously in terms of the idea that I am not here to set the board's priorities. I am here to hopefully provide you the best information possible, and whatever priorities you tell us to take them out and try to execute them. So we talked about the really nice spreadsheet that Jade put together for HVAC estimates that was, you know, well into the 8 or 9 figure range, 8 figure range. And so if throughout these conversations, it comes forward that this is the priority and that we want to push heavily in that direction, then I think that's the way we go. Again, the idea here, just to start conversations, give you an idea of what that could look like, not that these are priorities or they're not priorities or that they're what is going or is not going to be included, just to start the conversation and really help you start to formulate your thoughts around that. Back to the sports facility, I think, Mr. Swan, what becomes really apparent as you have conversations out in the community is that there's like overwhelming need for sports facilities in the community. And of course, the Sports Commission is doing their thing. And I think there would definitely be the ability to drive residual income from a facility like that, to partner. And I think that from a long-term perspective, it would be a great investment for the district, especially when you line that up with the idea that the district has spent several millions of dollars over a period of 30 or 40 years or however long that the fee has been paid to the School of Mines to rent that facility. So I think there's some opportunity there for sure.
All right, Chair recognizes Superintendent Swager.
Thank you, Bishop Carr. One of the things that Coy and I are really working hard to convey here is that, you know, our list of needs or wants could be much, much larger. However, respecting the appetite of our community to fund a bond, we are trying to be more realistic in an effort to bring everybody to the table on something that we can support for this build better. And so what do we feel would be our best interest to educate the board about what we feel that we could possibly pass? Now, additionally, as Mr. Coy pointed out at the board retreat, within the next 10 years, our debt ratio almost disappears, except for the $14 million on South. So we will have some ability to do something with capital outlay in the future as well. So we don't need to put everything that needs to be done on a bond. We're going to be able to recognize some things and handle them internally with our capital outlay. So if you add everything together, it's actually, you know, it's more than 132 million. But when we put things on here, we're not going to build a 200 student expansion on all of those sites. And we're not going to necessarily, on the next page, Coy, we're not going to necessarily hit all of the secure entrances or the HVAC or everything all encompassing under a bond. Some of that can come through district funds within the next few years as well. So we are trying to, as citizens of this community who have lived here quite a while, we're trying to think about what we believe that our citizens want us to advise you as a board to consider. And it is very tempting to go to the store hungry, right, and buy everything on the shelf. But we are trying to be responsible in our guidance of you. So we wanted you to know that. And as far as the sports complex, in addition to the $60,000-$70,000 we pay Tech every year, we have as a district thrown in money on different improvement projects they have done there, like the turf. It would be really nice to have the ability for our people to maintain our investment, because I think we come at it with a different approach. And the sports commission obviously wants bigger and better, and they want a indoor football field with a roof and everything like that. That is not our ask or what we're bringing forward. We're bringing forward something that is a traditional Friday night football field that absolutely could be available for Saturday afternoon games for other community events. And it would be something I think that the Sports Authority would be interested in talking to us about, and we could possibly work together. But more than anything, we're interested in being the landlords of this, having control for our maintenance, our facility, for our students. And it is a big ask, $8 to $10 million for an outdoor sports complex. And yet it has the ability to impact the largest number of students, because it would be both of our high schools, football, soccer, track, all of that, band, marching band, but also the ability for our middle schoolers to play on a field that is decent under the lights, which could possibly really positively impact interest in our activities to move forward. And of course, we know that activities are a really great way to keep kids engaged in school and graduate. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Good segue. So into the really nerdy stuff. One of the common criticisms that came through during the last bond was just in regard to the sheer size. In the impact it had on the community, impact it had on the taxpayers. And so Again, really important as we move into these discussions to understand what that landscape looks like currently, because it's changed very, very, very drastically since the last time we've had these conversations. And really, again, as we talked about at the retreat, trying to formulate a package that is digestible for the community and that they'll support while still serving the district's needs. So I wanted to give you an example. I went back with the financing company. We ran some scenarios, we had some discussion. So I want to give you this example. And as we talked about at the retreat, it's necessary that we make some key assumptions in terms of the variables that get plugged into that package. So if we started with the idea of 125 million, you saw in that scenario, we were landing in that range. At an interest rate of 5.75. And I'm going to jump forward for 1 second. And I want to show you, well, actually, I should say first, that again is complex because we are looking multiple years into the future and trying to predict what that's going to look like. So that is based on the best guess that companies that make a lot of money every year determining interest rates are giving us at this point. That the Fed is likely to continue to hike rates. The economy is not doing what you would think it would be doing, and it's driving all the economists crazy because it's not following the patterns that it would normally follows as inflation goes up and as supply and demand move. So that is at this point in time the best interest rate projection, which is aggressive. I think it is probably aggressive, but at this point in time, the best prediction as of right now. I want to skip forward one slide and I want to show you. This is a 20-year, so back to October of 2003, depiction of bond interest rates. And as you can see, they tend to do a lot of jumping back and forth. So all the way back in 2003, about 4.75% up to a high of about 5.75 in October of approximately 2008. I underlined this in red, this low point. You'll see that was in approximately the October of 20-ish and 21 timeframe. So that is in the time frame that the last bond was out. And as you all probably recall from being either directly in the conversation or around, that was something we talked about quite a lot, was the idea of capitalizing on these really historically low interest rates. And then again, things have changed drastically since then. We can see we're back up pretty significantly over that time period. I want you to keep that in mind because I'm going to come back to that here very shortly. Term of 20 years. So this example is based around a 20-year term. Previous bond was based on a 25-year term. Nicole got into this a little bit. I won't launch down this rabbit hole because I don't want to keep us here all night. But the benefit of reducing that term is really the idea of trying to get the district in a cycle where we're using both our capital outlay and bond mechanisms to put us and the community in a better situation where we can get on a more regular track of updating our facilities and not get in the position we were. So we wanted to look at it just for this example, a shorter term, and assuming a property valuation growth rate of 4%. Again, that was a debated issue throughout the last bond process. And I don't have it up in front of me, but I could show you over about the last 11-year period, valuation growth rates have been far over 4%, especially in the last 5 years in particular. Last year, property valuation of the district grew by 18%. So we've well exceeded that and feel like the 4% would be a very safe estimate in terms of valuation growth. Given those factors, the levy amount that would then keep the debt service every year at an even amount, so a break-even point, would be 0.72 per $1,000 of valuation. again, back to the last bond, you recall that that amount was about 0.85 at that time. So on a $400,000 property, which I know you're probably all thinking to yourself, that seems like a high amount. Well, if you look at the current release that Elevate just had today, the median home value in Rapid City is in the $450,000 range. So that's really, at this point in time, the median home value. Flashback to 2020, the last bond, we were using $250,000 for that figure. So again, just an indicator of what's happened between those time periods. So in a $400,000 property valuation, that would be about a $288 per year increase in property taxes, or about $24 a month. So total principal, 125 million. Interest payback would be 107.9 million, for a total payback of 232.9 million. Back to that graph you just saw. I wish I was making this up. I really do. In the 2020 bond, the district proposed to borrow 188.5 million. The interest payback at that point in time, because of those historically low interest rates, was 107.9 million. Again, I wish I was making that up. I couldn't believe today when I referenced back to put this information together. So $63 million less borrowed in the same amount of interest payback because of the change of interest rates. But again, that's right. It is what it is, but wanted to give you a really good idea of at this point in time where we felt that those numbers would land. So, and I think that is the last slide, President Carr.
Okay, thank you so very much.
Yes.
Wonderful presentation from both of you. This time we'll recognize Mr. Swan and then Mrs. Clapham, and then Kate and Deb, I'm assuming you all are with us. I think what I would like is to get comments from everybody, every board member about what's been discussed and about what your thought is for a bond. And then that's kind of what I wanted to get done tonight, is just kind of get where each board member was, pro or con, wherever you are. Okay.
Carr, can I very, very quickly make one other point? I'm sorry, I wanted to say this under my initial disclaimers, and I forgot. I think the other important point to add, based also on what you said, is really the idea tonight just being, we want to hear your thoughts so that as we start to continue to pull this information together, we can give you better and better information, and culminating in whatever direction the board goes. But that was the point, right?
Yes, sir. Thank you so very much.
Mhm.
All right, the chair recognizes Mr. Swan and then Mrs. Clapham.
Thank you, Coy. That was a great presentation. I just wanted to reiterate a fact that we had discussed at the retreat. And that was one thing about when we talked about interest rates. If interest rates were to fall again, that we could refinance. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Yeah, absolutely. You as those interest rates change, if it was favorable to the district, that you could refinance it. You could never add more. Of course, you couldn't over levy, but you could refinance the outstanding amount at whatever point in time that was.
And would that lower the levy then, or would that mean we pay out quicker?
You could go a couple different ways with that. You're not obligated. You could, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Not obligated in one way or another. You just could never levy more than what was proposed in the bond.
Okay, for members of the audience, I followed up with Walt's question, whether if we refinanced, if that would result in a lower levy of what we're taking from taxpayers. And Coy responded that it could go either way. We could pay it off sooner, or we could take less money.
And also, Coy, if valuations increased and were much higher like they have been in the last few years, that could also lower the levy.
Really important point and excellent point. So just for fun, I went back and worked through the scenario with the bond finance folks of what the current levy would look like for the previous proposed bond. And again, that really rapid property valuation increase would have brought that levy down to about 0.5, so about 50 cents. So it would have been about 35 cents under where it currently would have been, or excuse me, currently where we predicted it would have been because of that. So that's a really great point. There's multiple factors inside that have the ability to pull that levy down on a year-to-year basis.
So that actually kind of answered part of my questions. And this might, well, I guess it might be for both of you. At one time, and I don't know enough details of the old bond to fully accurately ask this, but at one time, there was some discussion about the theater at Stevens. And would that be something, do we have any idea what the cost estimate would be now to do that? I understand it's been discussed for a number of years in the district, so would that be something that the board would be encouraged to consider?
Yeah, go ahead. I'll pull up the.
You know, I think I have been with the district a very long time, and I have directed plays, built sets, and done a lot of things in that theater. And it is very different space than we currently have at Central High School. However, Stevens High School as a whole is an older building that has a lot of needs. So I think that conversation would need to include Stevens High School administration and staff in that conversation about, you know, where is the greatest need at Stevens? Does the community have a better appetite for safety and security at Stevens? Because there are certainly a lot of safety and security concerns just based on the floor print of that building. Is there a need? So interestingly enough, prior to 2019, the last bond that failed was in 1991. And if you've paid attention to me over the last year and a half, that was the first year I was hired full-time in the district. That bond was for $18 million. And it was to build a third high school at is what currently the site of Western Dakota Votech. $18 million would have built a third high school at that site. Since 1991, we have invested approximately $80 million in Central, Stevens, Rapid City High School to do basically what we could have accomplished for $18 million in 1991. So I think the point I'm trying to make here is it never gets cheaper. It never gets cheaper to make better. And it's not about, remember, it's not about bigger. It never gets cheaper to make better. And is it time to do better?
So the estimate that was included for Stevens was 19 million. However, that included fine arts, classroom additions, theater safety and security upgrades, and then some work to the guidance counselor and administrative offices as well. So I think we need to get Mr. Clement over there and have him put eyes on it and give us a better thought or idea what that would look like. But yeah, I think Nicole answered that really well.
Thank you. Chair will recognize Mrs. Baker. Deb, you have to unmute if you're talking. We're not, okay.
There. Well, I am all for a small bond. I'm not for going for a huge bond right off the bat because I don't think we'll get it. I think that we should seriously consider expansion of some of these grade schools, South Park and Grandview for sure, because I think that would accommodate or do a really good job of accommodating Robbinsdale and Wilson if we need to shut those down sometime. I agree. I mean, there's a ton of need out there. I think for the sports complex, I think we ought to try to do what they did in Sioux Falls, get sponsors, get Sanford. You know, Sanford did that one there. We've got Monument, we've got Black Hills Energy, we got Skull Construction. mean, if we could get some sponsors to help get a sports facility going, I think that would be awesome. So get some community input or, community help with that. This is my thoughts on this. There's a huge difference between nice and necessary. So it's my 2 cents worth.
Anybody else? Any other? Yeah. The chair recognizes Mrs. Stephenson.
I have probably more than 2 cents, but I'm gonna keep it brief. I agree with Deb about looking carefully at a South Park and Grandview expansion so that we can make sure that we have all of our bases covered. You will be hard pressed to get me to support a sports facility in this bond. I'm just gonna say that flat out, unless we go into this community and hold all the meetings that we're planning and everybody says that we're clamoring for it. I am a huge, huge proponent of sports and activities. I think the benefits of football can be gained on the field that we have, and I'm a huge proponent of sharing, especially facilities like that. It doesn't bother me that we pay $60,000 a year to use a school of mines. It just doesn't bother me. And I want our high schoolers to have access to sports, but I don't think we need to elevate sports above, for example, a CTE. That is important to me. When I see potentially 5 million for CTE and potentially, whatever, 13 million for a sports complex, I'm like, my priorities don't lie there. However, so I've said the two things that I really wanted to say. And then the third thing kind of is my mind is malleable based on what we hear from the community as we go out. I love that you did this for us and for the community to say, here's where we see the priorities being right now. Here's where we see what they're costing. I'd love to hear from the community to say, are we missing something here? Or are we wrong in saying what these priorities are? And then coming back together to adjust as necessary. But I appreciate the work you put into it. I look forward to the discussions over the next few months.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Mrs. Thomas.
Yeah, thank you, President Carr. I would agree with Deb that if we could do help for future for Robbinsdale, that if we could do that on our own, that would give, I think, the public the trust that, hey, we're trying to spend the money that we have already conservatively and respectfully where the priority is for the future. Then also, I would agree with Christine. I would not be supportive of a complex as important as that is, a sports complex, only because there are, as I've been going through some of these buildings with the facilities with Mr. Clement and Kathy, and it has been very enlightening. One of the top priorities I can see coming out of a facility as a bond for facilities would be that there is a permanent standard safety room, quote unquote, for every school. Part of the reason we lost teachers, I know firsthand from several, they left because behavioral problems were not being met. Now, that isn't the only reason teachers are leaving. Obviously, it's across the country for a number of different reasons. But in every school that we've been in so far, there's no, I mean, they are doing the best they can with whatever room they can work with. But as soon as you start putting money into that room, you don't want to break it down and have to move it again. And that seems to be something that's happening. And I just see that as the top priority. That can cost us more in the long run. You know, we can share fields for now. That is, I guess, what I would offer the board is what I've seen on the facilities as being a top priority for a quest or an ask for that bond.
All right, thank you, Ms. Thomas. The chair recognizes Mrs. Clapham, and then Mrs. Baker.
Few thoughts. I probably don't feel quite as strongly, on the negative side of the sports complex, but it's certainly not a make or break, for me either. And I agree to hear out the community. I do think we have to be cautiously talk about expansion, and I definitely think it's fiscally responsible and wise to talk about expansion. But also one of the big things when we talk about HVAC is we do have to address equity. I mean, we're talking about, well, we can, expand here, but we talk about how different the experiences in buildings. And so if that means that we do 4 expansions and we start in elementary school, maybe that's what that means. But I hate the term politics side, but people who know me and hopefully the community knows that I mean what I say and I say what I mean. And when I was campaigning and talking about equitable education, it shouldn't matter that I moved here and I'm in a school that doesn't have air conditioning and the HVAC is 80 years old, and that's important. And so what that looks like, I'm not fully sure. But for me, when I look at the bond is how can we do the most to be as equitable as possible? The other thing I think that one of the things that hasn't really been talked about in this space, we talked about it a little bit at the retreat also, was the last bond. There was a lot of, I think, discussion about a perception of we don't want neighborhood schools, or some people are anti-neighborhood schools, or I would go on the record and say I am not anti-neighborhood schools. However, when we hear the feedback of this bond is too big, is all the costs to run 23 schools. We have to have 23 principals. We have to transport kids to all those buildings. We have to upgrade the HVAC in all those buildings. So I think the community needs to hear which way do you want us to go? If we want to be fiscally responsible, we want to be sustainable. If we try to keep all 23, I guess excluding Kenyon, 22 schools, the expense of that and the expense of maintaining those buildings has to be considered. So I think when we do look at expansion, yes, we're talking about a South Park or a Grandview having 600 students, because then we have one administrator for that building, not 3 or 4. So for me, that understanding that we are trying to be fiscally responsible, hear the community, and that, if a bond is too big, but that may also mean that we have to consolidate on some levels, because it is very difficult to maintain and keep 23 buildings and 600 acres and all of that running at one time. So for me, I think I have to look at that and what's feasible, even though some of those decisions are hard.
All right, Mrs. Thomas, do you have additional comments? Your hand is still up.
No, sorry about that.
Okay, Ms. Baker.
I just want to make it clear, and I agree with Christine. I do not think that the sports complex should ever be included in a bond. What I was trying to get at is if we want a sports complex, then I think we need to reach out to our community, to the people that, that could help get that done. So I just want to make that clear. I don't want one in the bond.
Hey, Mr. Swan.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. One thing I would like to reiterate to all of us is that the conversation is just starting. There's nothing set in stone right now, we don't need to dig in our heels. We don't need to, kind of say I will never, or this is not going to happen. There are a lot of things that we need to consider. When you pass a bond, you have to listen to people. And that's, we're setting it forth for conversation, you have to listen to people. And if you're willing to listen, you'll hear. But if you're, already have your mind made up one way or another, then that's the way it's going to go. So I'm just cautioning that we listen, we be as Jamie said, malleable. You know what I mean? That we listen to their community, we listen to the people that gave us these offices. And we go in with a clear mind and a good heart to make this happen for what's best for our students rather than what's best for our political agenda. Thank you, Mr. Carr.
Thank you. I think for me, one of the, obviously, as we enter this process, the most difficult thing is need is in the eye of the beholder. I'm going to be a fervent advocate of a sports facility because I don't want to rent something I can own. It's the same question about renting a house versus buying a house. And I'd rather have my own. And for me, when we talk about the concept of better, it's better, it meets the definition of better, and it's forward thinking, right? So again, for me, it's a need. I enjoy I would side with, if I, again, I always use, sometimes I use the statement, if I were king. But if I was king, I would do everything on the list that Mr. Sassy presented. I think it's a little bit of everything. It's air conditioning, air quality, air heating in buildings, it's expansion, it's CTE, it's sport complex. It's a little bit of everything. And so I'm really about that. And as I said, I'm going to be a big proponent of trying to squeeze the sports complex in there. The other comment that I would like to make is obviously we have to reference the old bond, and I appreciate, Mr. Swan, what you said, that this is a fresh start. And I hope we don't bring the baggage and the issues from the old bond into this bond, because it's not the same. It's, it's just different. So I hope, we have human nature to pull back from the past, and some people in this community have long memories and all that. But so my point is, I hope that we can take a new look and look at things different, and whatever disagreements we had in the last bond, that we set those aside and look at what we're doing. My other thing is, I think the approach that I'm going to have with this bond is working together. It's a concept of, okay, let's get in a room and figure it out. Again, so I appreciate what you said, Mr. Swan, that we all have different interests. We understand we all have different interests, but at the end, we have to do something. And I hope it's something that we can rally around. In any good decision, everybody's not going to get what they want. But if we can come together, communicate, hash it out, and as I've been saying since I've been on this board, disagreement is not bad. It's my thing is, you're not a bad person because you disagree with me. So we're going to disagree, but let's talk and get something out. Thank you. The chair recognizes Mrs. Stephenson and Mrs. Thomas.
Thanks. I just thought of a couple other things I'd like to add. As we go out in the community, I think some version of this presentation, I would assume we would be giving some version of this, that these are the current needs and this is the cost of meeting those needs. Two things I wouldn't mind added are the cost of AC at North Middle School and the cost of securing Stevens. Like if those two costs could be in there, so that, because I feel like that's a high priority for a lot of people. And so we should have accurate numbers about those two things as well.
Thank you. Mrs. Thomas.
Thanks. I had a couple more thoughts too, that I forgot to mention, which is, I do agree with what Deb had said earlier. If we could get, community support in putting in for that, although we may run into our own policy problems with, depending on who puts into that, they may want their name up on that sports complex. And if we own it, we've got a policy that says we don't put names on that. And maybe that's something we also reconsider down the line too. I don't know. But also to that same point, CTE in Sioux Falls has many industries around them that have donated. So for working on cars, welding, etc., they there's different areas around that have donated welding stuff. They've donated cars. They've donated, depending on the industry. There's an agricultural, a fishing, fish like hatchery thing going on now I guess this year, because it was being built last year, among other, a whole news anchor room. They've got, where different local news agencies have donated their old equipment. It's at least something. It may be not firsthand industry standard, but their kitchen, same thing, stoves, etc., slide big fridges that the community's donated. And that could at least get us started with a CTE, and then whatever specific thing we need for maybe the building, we could put into the bond. That's one of the other main things that I think, if we're going to go for the bond, that would need to be it. So.
Thank you, Mrs. Thomas. Anybody else? Okay. Right, we'll move on to other. Any board members have any other? Okay, one thing we have to discuss, board, is whether last year when we did the ASBSD resolutions, we did that by Zoom. Is there a preference for October the 24th? I will not be at the meeting, so are you planning on being at the meeting? So Vice President Clapham will have the gavel. She will be able, she's the gatekeeper who's able to talk or not. You'll when you get it, you'll feel that power surge. So board members, do you all have a preference whether you want to meet here in the building or to do Zoom? I do not. Whatever your pleasure is, we will go with that. Chair will recognize Mrs. Thomas and Mrs. Baker. Kate, are you wanting to?
Everyone.
Okay.
Did I have my hand up?
Yeah.
I didn't think
Still
so.
up.
Yes, you
All right,
did.
Mrs. Baker.
I think
Doesn't show it.
I believe that we discussed this when we were at the retreat, or whenever we talked about this last. I cannot be at that meeting on the 24th. So,
Okay.
but we have to have that stuff turned in by the 20th to Shirley, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So that will be two of us not there. So
Can we have it a different day or no?
the other day is, the next day is the 31st, but that's Halloween. And I don't think.
I do not go trick or treating.
Huh?
I do not go trick or treating. Do you?
I don't, but some people do with their kids.
I'm being as smart as normal.
Oh, okay. I just go buy the candy. Stay warm and go buy the candy. All right.
No.
To answer your question, I guess it is possible to change the date, but we're bumping up. The meeting is November 17th, that Friday, if my brain is working right. So if we don't do it in October, we're forcing ourselves to have to do it. Well, we have to do it that first week, second week of November.
Bishop Carr,
Yes, ma'am.
could I ask permission to have Charlotte possibly send out a doodle poll
Okay.
on dates for a possible Zoom? Because it wouldn't necessarily have to be on a Tuesday. It could be a Monday or a Wednesday or a Thursday. And then when the most people can attend via Zoom, because remember, you only talk about the things that there's discrepancies in. If everybody agrees on all of the resolutions, then you don't even have to have a meeting.
Sure.
So Shirley will know more after she gets those back from you on the 20th, but she can send out a doodle poll. I'd love to give Shirley things to do. But she could send out a doodle poll and then we could determine when the most people could attend and then go with that, if that.
Thank you for
pleases
that suggestion. I could go with that and just as you said, board members, if you can please have your sheet filled out to Shirley by this Friday? No, the 20th? Next Friday. Okay, if you can have that to her, that would, I'm sure she would. Yeah. Okay, anybody else? All right. Kate and Deb, I don't know if your hands are fresh or old. They're old. Okay, Chair recognizes Mrs. Clapham.
Like, I just wanted to say a huge thank you. The amount of work to get all of that information and all the time that you've all been at work all day. And we really, really appreciate, it's easier to be a good board when we have good information and when we have good things to go by. So I'm really, really appreciative. My husband's the numbers person, I'm not. So I know that there is a lot of work and time and effort, and I appreciate all of you. And Dr. Schlosser, thank you for being here and just spending that extra time, because I know we all have very busy lives. So I'm very appreciative.
I want to thank Coy. He did an amazing job.
Yes.
Fantastic. And he is able to do that amazing job because of his amazing team. So Jade and Kathy and everybody else who weighed in on that, thank you.
I almost feel like making a motion that at every board meeting, Mr. Strasser has to say 3 words.
I like it. I would approve that.
You know, we can get that in. So you might want to kind of start talking more before we put it in as a motion of policy.
I'm gone next Tuesday, so whoever's in charge.
Okay, okay, so he's gonna have to talk. All right, thank you all. And but one more important thing, whoever it was that worked on the board appreciation event that we had last Tuesday, thank you so very much. It feels good to be appreciated. As those of you that have sat in the seats understand that it is not an easy job. And I was just telling somebody yesterday, if you had the time, you could spend a full-time job of hours studying policies and reading and talking to people and different things. So I don't know who sponsored that appreciation, but thank you.
So Bishop Carr, that appreciation was the brainchild of Jennifer Roberts,
Okay.
Principal at Rapid City Alternative Academy, but she reached out and all the schools participated in that. So she was the brainchild, but all of the principals and all the schools came together to do that. So thank you very much for recognizing them. It is also Principal Appreciation Month. So it is. No, it really is Principal Appreciation Month.
Okay.
And so
All right. Do we have anything lined up for them or
not yet.
Well, since we're talking, it's also Clergy Appreciation Month also.
Okay.
So, all right.
I think it's Deb Baker Appreciation Month.
Physical Therapy Month, is it? Okay, all right. Keep it going. We can, everybody gets celebrated. All right. Anything else? Any other? All right, seeing none, I'll take a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Any discussions? All in favor? Oh, well, roll call.
Troy,
Yes.
Jamie,
Yes.
Christine,
Yes.
Deb,
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
Walt.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0.
All right. Thank you, everyone. See you next time.